Darren stood at the edge of the narrow date road, staring at the farmhouse that had once been his whole world, though its windows now looked hollow, as if they remembered every secret, every argument, every silent dinner when no one met his eyes. He had imagined this return for years, rehearsing what he might say, yet now his throat felt sealed. The late afternoon light stretched across the fields in long amber strokes, and the air smelled of cut hay and approaching rain. All of it struck him at once, familiar, unchanged, and still capable of wounding him. He took a slow breath, each inhale grounding him in a landscape that remembered him even when the people inside had tried to forget. He walked forward, boots pressing softly into the earth as if the land itself listened, recognizing the boy who had once run barefoot through rows of corn, chasing shadows. Every step made him aware of the distance between who he had been and who he had become, yet he let the memories surface. He needed them, painful or not. He recalled the night everything had collapsed, when the truth he had spoken, quietly, tremorously, had been met with a storm he had never seen coming. He had learned early that rejection could be loud, but exile could be even louder, especially when delivered by the people meant to protect. The porch creaked in the same rhythm it used to when he snuck out after dark. As he approached, he noticed how the paint had peeled into curling strips and how one railing leaned tiredly to the side. Time had touched the house, but gently, much more gently than it had touched him. He placed a hand on the post, feeling the rough grain beneath his palm, remembering how his father used to sand it every spring, insisting it gave the place dignity. Now it only looked like a monument to waiting for him, or perhaps waiting for an ending no one wished to name. Behind the door, he imagined a brief shiver of movement. He could still see the scene from that night as vividly as if replayed on glass. His mother standing stiff near the table, fingers clutching a dish towel, his father's shadow stretching long across the floorboards, and him, 14, trembling, hopeful, foolish, thinking honesty would bring understanding. It hadn't. The shouting had grown sharp, then sharper still, until everything dissolved into a blur of slammed drawers, accusations, and the final command to leave. He remembered stepping into the cold air, frightened but stubborn, tears streaking across his cheeks as he walked toward the road with nothing but a backpack and the raw certainty that staying would have broken him more than leaving ever could. Such departures rarely make sense to the heart, yet they carve paths one must follow. Now he stood here again, years later, older in ways that could not be measured by time alone. He had survived nights in cheap motels, days of working odd jobs, and the slow but steady reconstruction of a self that had once been fractured by shame. Yet no matter how far he traveled, a piece of him remained tethered to this house, this porch, this land. He wasn't sure if longing or defiance had brought him back, perhaps both, intertwined and inseparable. The wind rustled the tall grass, carrying faint echoes of laughter from long ago, reminding him that not all memories lived in the dark. Many carried warmth, even if touched by sadness. As he stepped closer to the door, he noticed a faint scent of rose soap drifting on the breeze, a fragrance his mother always favored. It startled him, stirring a fragile hope he wasn't prepared to feel. He reached for the door but found his fingers trembling, so he curled them into a fist instead, grounding himself against the rising tide of conflicting emotions. He had come back for a reason, though he wasn't sure how much strength that reason granted him now that he stood at the threshold. Still, retreat no longer felt like an option. The years had taught him that avoidance only deepened the wounds time tried to close. A soft noise came from inside, something like a chair shifting or footsteps crossing worn wood. His pulse quickened. The light outside dimmed as heavy clouds gathered, cooling the air and sending a shiver through his spine. He swallowed hard, aware that this moment marked a turning point, though he couldn't predict what waited beyond the door. All he knew was that the fear pressing against his ribs felt different now, not the kind that silenced him, but the kind that challenged him to stay. He realized that even small steps could carry immense meaning. Just as he reached for the handle, the door opened a crack. Warm, yellow light spilled out onto the porch, cutting through the dusk and illuminating his face. In that narrow space, a familiar voice spoke his name, soft but unmistakably real, carrying years of unspoken words in a single breath. The sound froze him, struck him, steadied him all at once. He had imagined anger, coldness, maybe even silence, but not this, not the quiet, trembling relief woven into the syllables of his own name. That gentle recognition shifted something deep within him, as if a locked door inside had finally cracked open. He exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a long, uneven whisper. This wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't reconciliation either. It was something small and perhaps more precious, a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably present. He took one step forward, letting the light warm his face as rain finally began to fall, its soft patter echoing the heartbeat he had carried alone for so long. And in that moment, he understood that crossing this threshold would reshape not just his past, but everything that came after. And he knew that whatever waited inside would test the strength he had fought so long to build, pushing him toward a truth he could no longer outrun. The wind had a different voice the night Darren left home. It carried a sharp, metallic chill that clung to his sleeves as he walked toward the edge of town, clutching the thin backpack he had grabbed in panic. The world beyond the last porch light felt wider than he had imagined, a stretch of quiet darkness broken only by the hum of distant traffic. He kept walking, unsure where to stop, unsure how to breathe without the walls of home, even a broken home, around him. Hunger tightened in his stomach, but pride refused to let him turn back. He dug his nails into the straps of his backpack and kept moving, one uncertain step at a time. By the time he reached the gas station at the highway, the moon was half hidden behind gray clouds. The building glowed harshly under fluorescent lights, revealing every crack in the pavement. Darren hovered near the door, pretending to study a rack of wiper blades so the clock wouldn't chase him off. His shoes squelched faintly. The ground still held a memory of yesterday's rain. He watched a man buy coffee, watched a woman refill a car, but no one noticed a boy with damp sleeves and wide, sleepless eyes. When the clock finally glanced at him, suspicion flickered instantly. Darren lowered his head and walked out before he could be told to leave. He followed the sidewalk until it dissolved into a stretch of uneven gravel. The night grew colder, thickening with a silence that pressed into his ears. He rubbed his arms, trying to keep warmth close, but the cold had a way of slipping through seams. A street lamp buzzed overhead, flickering with tired electricity. Beneath it stood a bus-stop bench, metal, hard, indifferent. Darren sat down, pulling his knees close. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping briefly across his face like someone dragging a flashlight over forgotten ground. Each burst of light made his heart lurch with unspoken hope, as if one of those cars might stop, roll down a window, and call him back by name. But none did. His breath fogged in the air, thin and fragile. He rested his forehead on his arms, listening to the world move without him. A stray dog trotted across the road. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the dark. The loneliness settled like a weight on his chest, heavier than the backpack that held the last pieces of home. He wondered if his father had already locked the door behind him, if his mother had cried or looked away or both. The image twisted inside him, sharp and merciless. He wiped his cheeks with the sleeve of his jacket, hiding even from the night's indifferent gaze. As dawn approached, a faint pale light seeped across the sky, softening the edges of the road. Darren pushed himself up, body stiff from the cold. He walked along the shoulder until he reached a small park, empty, silent, still bearing dew on the peeling slide and broken swings. He sat beneath the pavilion roof, tracing the grain of the wooden bench with his fingertip. His hands trembled with exhaustion. He set the backpack beside him and unzipped it to take inventory. One spare shirt, a half-eaten granola bar, a photograph of his mother smiling in sunlight that already felt like another lifetime. He closed the zipper slowly, as if sealing memory inside it. Hunger grew sharper, an ache that pulsed beneath every thought. He walked toward a small vending machine near the restrooms and pressed his forehead against the cool metal. He counted the coins in his pocket, 32 cents. Not enough for anything. His stomach tightened in frustration, and he turned away, swallowing the rising panic. When he spotted a drinking fountain nearby, he rushed toward it. The water sputtered weakly, but it was something. He cupped his hands, drinking until the hollow space inside him felt slightly less empty. He drifted toward the edge of the park where a stand of trees cast long morning shadows. The sun had barely risen, yet the heat of the day already hinted at its arrival. Darren lowered himself onto the grass, leaning against a tree trunk. His body ached with fatigue. He pressed his cheek to the rough bark, grounding himself in its solid presence. For a moment, he let his eyes close. Sleep approached in sluggish waves, interrupted only by the uneasy awareness that safety was not something he could trust anywhere anymore. But exhaustion eventually overpowered caution, pulling him into an uneasy slumber filled with fragmented memories and half-formed fears. A group of joggers passed an hour later, their footsteps crunching rhythmically on the gravel path. Their voices floated across the park, light and untroubled, a stark contrast to the heaviness inside him. Darren stirred but stayed still, unwilling to reveal himself. He stared at the sky through a lattice of leaves, watching clouds drift as if the world itself moved effortlessly while he remained stuck, caught between what he had lost and what he did not know how to seek. As the sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down on the park. Darren rose, dizzy and unsteady. Sweat clung to his neck. He walked toward a shaded bench, wiping his brow. His shirt clung to him, damp from both warmth and worry. He looked down at his hands, noticing how they trembled, a mix of hunger, fear, and something deeper he couldn't name. He wondered if anyone in the world sensed the absence of a boy on a porch that morning, or if time had simply folded over the space he once occupied. He sat again, letting his body slump. His throat tightened. "Why doesn't anyone care?" he whispered to the empty air. The words sounded too small, swallowed by the rustling leaves. He rubbed his palms together, trying to chase off the chill that lingered in his bones despite the heat. His thoughts spiraled into questions about belonging, about identity, about whether he had made a mistake telling the truth. But every time the doubt formed, he remembered his father's voice twisting into something harsh and sharp, and he knew he had done what he needed to survive himself. Hours passed in slow, aching increments. The days stretched long, unforgiving. Darren's legs felt heavy. His mind felt dull. He stood again, unsure where to go, unsure how to move forward. The world felt too large, too indifferent, and he felt too small inside it. He walked without direction, every step shaped by exhaustion. When he finally stopped, the sun had shifted to the west, casting warm orange light across the pavement. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, eyes unfocused. His breath hitched as a wave of dizziness washed through him. He pressed a hand to a lamppost, trying to steady himself. Shapes blurred. The sound of passing cars dimmed. He blinked, fighting the darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. And then he felt it, a warm hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm, grounding him as if pulling him back from the edge he hadn't realized he was standing on. Darren froze. The touch was unexpected, steady, human. He turned slowly as a soft voice, low and calm, spoke beside him. "You shouldn't be alone out here." The words carried a warmth he hadn't felt in days, a warmth that pierced through the fog of hunger and fear, awakening something inside him he thought he had lost. The stranger's eyes held concern, real concern, the kind he hadn't seen in far too long. And just like that, the emptiness inside him shifted, making room for something he didn't dare name yet. Not hope, not fully, but the beginning of it, faint and trembling, like a match struck in darkness. The wind carried a chill as he stepped out to the bus, the same small town lying ahead like a memory he had tried for years to bury. Nothing had changed. The rusted water tower still leaned at an angle, the main street was still lined with cracked sidewalks, and the same tired old banner hung over the hardware store window. Yet everything felt smaller, like grief had shrunk the whole place while he was gone. He adjusted the strap on his worn duffel bag, the one he had carried through shelters, friends' couches, and the tiny apartment he had finally managed to rent in the city. 10 years. 10 years since he stood on this road barefoot, shivering, clutching the little backpack he had packed in the dark. 10 years since his father slammed the door behind him and told him never to come back. He inhaled deeply. He had come anyway. Not for forgiveness. He owed this town nothing. Not for nostalgia. There was none. He had returned because someone had to break the silence that had swallowed this place, and he was no longer a frightened boy desperate to be loved. As he walked toward the heart of town, people paused mid-step. A woman dropping groceries stared too long, a shopkeeper froze with a broom in his hand, and 2 teenagers nudged each other, whispering as if a ghost had wandered into daylight. They all knew him. Small towns never forget. Not the scandals, not the shame, not the boy who was thrown out just for being different. He kept walking. He reached the old diner, the one with the flickering red neon sign his mother used to admire even when it annoyed his father. Through the window, he spotted her inside, older now, hair streaked with silver, hands trembling slightly as she refilled a cup of coffee. She turned, sensed a shadow, and her eyes met his through the glass. Her breath hitched. The coffee pot nearly slipped from her fingers. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling instantly. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, a sound he had missed more than he expected. She whispered his name like a prayer. She was afraid to speak too loudly, afraid he might vanish if she said it wrong. She reached for him, hesitated, then finally wrapped her arms around him with years of softness she had swallowed to survive under a man who demanded silence. "I'm so sorry," she choked, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. "You were just a child." He closed his eyes. He wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, but he let her hold him. In that moment, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about finally being seen. The diner fell silent. Forks stopped midair. Conversations died. Everyone watched the reunion like it was a scene from a story none of them had the courage to rewrite. His mother pulled back and touched his cheek, studying the face she'd missed growing up. You came home." "No," he said softly. "I came back. There's a difference." She swallowed hard but nodded. She understood. He sat with her in the corner booth, the same one where he used to finish homework, doodling drawings she kept hidden from his father. She fidgeted with her apron, glancing toward the door every few seconds. "He doesn't know you're here," she whispered. He looked out the window, where the afternoon sun stretched shadows across the pavement. "I know." She lowered her voice. "He hasn't changed." Neither had the fear in her eyes, but he wasn't the boy who had flinched every time his father raised his voice. Before either of them could speak again, the door creaked open. Heavy footsteps entered. The air thickened instantly. His father, still broad-shouldered, still carrying the same storm behind his eyes. Age hadn't softened him, it had hardened the edges. He stopped at the entrance when he saw them, his expression locking into something unreadable. A stunned silence fell over the diner. The father's jaw clenched. The son sat taller, calmer. The mother trembled. For the first time in his life, he didn't look away. He felt no fear, only truth. And that truth was finally strong enough to stand. The diner felt too small for the three of them. His father's boots scraped against the old linoleum floor, each step echoing like a warning. The son didn't move. He kept his arms on the table, steady, grounded. His mother hovered between them, unsure whether to stand or sit, torn between fear and the desperate hope that this moment might not end in the same violence that had defined their home for years. His father's voice came first, low, rough, and cold. "So, you're back." Not a welcome, not a question, an accusation. The son met his eyes. "I didn't come for you." Something flickered across the old man's face. Pride bruised, ego scraped, authority threatened. For men like him, silence from a child was disrespect, but silence from a grown man was defiance. "You didn't have to come back at all," his father muttered, chest rising with controlled anger. "You made your choice." The son breathed out slowly, refusing to match the heat in the old man's tone. "I didn't make a choice. You made it for me." His mother shut her eyes. Those words cut too close to wounds she had spent years pretending didn't exist. The father's fist tightened. "I raised you. I fed you. And you threw it all away because of who I am," the son finished for him. "Because I didn't fit into whatever version of a son you imagined. Because I wasn't the boy you wanted to parade in front of your friends." Murmurs stirred in the diner. Everyone was listening, pretending not to look, pretending not to breathe. His father's voice sharpened, cold and vicious. "I threw you out because you brought shame into my house." The mother flinched as if struck. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Not yet. Not until she was sure she wouldn't break apart. The son leaned forward. "The only shame in that house was you." Silence crashed like thunder. His father blinked, rage simmering so visibly that even old Mr. Turner at the counter put down his fork. The son didn't back down. He didn't raise his voice. That was the thing about real strength. Sometimes it sounded like calm. "You hit me," the son continued, "for years. For things that didn't matter. For breathing too loud. For wearing the wrong shirt. For being myself. You needed discipline," the father snapped. No, the son shook his head slowly. "I needed a father. You gave me fear instead." For the first time, his father looked uncertain, not defeated, Men like him didn't crumble, but shaken. The mother stepped forward then, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. This time, she didn't look afraid. You didn't see him, she said quietly to her husband. You didn't see how he cried himself to sleep. You didn't see how he had bruises so the neighbors wouldn't ask. You didn't see anything because you didn't want to. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. You ruined our home, she whispered. The father stared at her as if seeing a stranger. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The son didn't feel triumph, only grief. He stood slowly from the booth, the legs of the chair scraping softly against the floor. I didn't come back to fight. I didn't come back to forgive, either. That's not why I'm here. His father swallowed hard. Then why? To close the door you slammed open for years, the son said. To end this cycle so it doesn't swallow me anymore. The mother covered her mouth, voice trembling. You're leaving again? Yes, he said gently, but not running this time. His father's breath hitched, barely noticeable to anyone but the two people who knew him best. Beneath his anger, beneath his stubbornness, there was something else. Fear, not of his son, but of a truth he could no longer escape. He had lost the boy he tried to force into someone else. The son stepped closer, leaving only a few feet between them. The room went still again. You don't have power over me anymore, he said softly. What you did doesn't define me. The world you tried to chain me to, I outgrew it. His father's jaw trembled, a tiny fracture in a man who had been carved from stone his whole life. The son took a final breath. I hope one day you understand what you lost, but I'm done carrying it. He brushed past him, the slightest shoulder touch making the old man flinch. His mother grabbed his hand. Please, she whispered, let me come with you, just for a moment. He nodded, and they walked out together into the late afternoon light. The town felt different now, not smaller, not painful, just finished. Inside the diner, the father stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. For the first time, he wasn't the biggest man in the room. For the first time, everyone saw him clearly. For the first time, he looked alone. They walked in silence at first, mother and son side by side, the sun dipping low behind the rusted rooftops of the town he once feared. The long stretch of cracked pavement felt like a border he had crossed once before. Only that time, he was 14, barefoot, shivering, carrying nothing but shame someone else had planted in him. Now, he walked with a steady stride, his mother keeping pace, glancing at him in little stolen moments as if memorizing him. When they reached the edge of the empty lot behind the diner, she finally spoke. You're different, she whispered. Stronger, but softer too. Like the world didn't harden you the way I feared. He smiled faintly. It tried. I just refused to let it finish the job. She wiped her cheeks again. I should have gone after you that night. He stopped, turning to her gently. You couldn't. I could have, she insisted, voice trembling. I could have grabbed you, held you, run with you. I could have chosen you instead of him. He shook his head. You were surviving too. I understand that now. Her shoulders collapsed in relief. For 10 years, those words had been waiting, quiet ghosts between them. And just like that, something inside her seemed to loosen, like a knot untied. They kept walking until they reached the old oak tree behind the schoolyard, its branches twisted, its trunk carved with initials from kids long grown. He paused beneath it, staring at the faint marks he had once made with a stolen pocket knife. D12. The year he was still trying to figure out who he was, long before he understood why everything felt different. You remember this place? She asked softly. Every inch of it, he said. This was where I'd hide after school, where I'd breathe. He didn't add, where I'd pray for a home that didn't break me. She didn't need to hear it. She felt it. A wind picked up, warm, carrying the scent of cut grass and summer dust. For a moment, mother and son simply stood there, as if the tree itself was granting them permission to speak truths they once buried. I was afraid of losing your father, she confessed suddenly, but I lost you instead. He exhaled slowly. You don't have to explain. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. I've imagined every reason you stayed, every reason you didn't come after me, every possibility. And every time, I found that I still wanted you in my life." She covered her face with her hands and cried, not with guilt this time, but with relief. He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly, his chin resting on her hair. She clung to him like he was something she wasn't sure she deserved but had prayed for anyway. When she finally steadied, she stepped back. "Where will you go now?" "Back home," he said. "Not this one. The one I built. The one I chose." "And you're happy there?" Her voice trembled on the last word, afraid of the answer. He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. "For the first time in my life." She closed her eyes. "Is there someone?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." A warmth spread across her face, softening her features. "Does he treat you kind?" He felt his throat tighten. "Every day." She pressed both hands over her heart. "That's all I ever wanted for you. Kindness." The sun had dipped lower, stretching their shadows long across the grass. The town behind them murmured faintly with evening sounds, cars passing, kids calling to each other, a dog barking somewhere near the highway. Life moving on, as if the earth didn't realize something monumental was happening in the small silence beneath the oak tree. He looked toward the road leading out of town. "I should go soon." She nodded, though her fingers lingered on his sleeve. But before he could step away, she said, "I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if the answer hurts." He turned back, waiting. "Will I get to meet him?" she whispered. The question pierced him, not in a painful way, but in the way something tender pierces, unexpected, gentle, hopeful. "Yes," he said, "whenever you're ready." She let out a shaky breath, half sob, half laugh. "I'd like that more than you know." They walked together toward the road, but as they reached the corner where their paths would split, her steps slowed. She looked back toward the diner, toward the life she still shared with a man who had carved so many scars into the people he claimed to love. "He won't change," she said, almost to herself. "No," the son replied. "He won't." "And she swallowed, "I don't think I can stay anymore." He studied her face. 4 years. She had been a painting of fear, edges sharp, colors muted. But now, there was something new in her eyes. A quiet fire. A beginning. "You don't have to decide today," he said gently. "I already did." Her voice didn't shake this time. "You walked away once, and I let it happen. But tonight, I'm the one who's leaving." A long silence stretched between them, full of everything they had survived and everything they were becoming. "Then I'll help you," he said softly. She stepped forward and hugged him again, tighter, steadier, without apology. When they finally parted, the sky was washed in gold. The son stepped toward the road, the life he chose waiting for him. But before he reached the corner, his mother called out one last time, "Darren." He turned. She smiled through her tears. "You didn't return to shock everyone. You returned to save me." His breath caught. Just once. Just enough to feel everything at once. Then, with a steady heart and unshakable steps, he walked toward the horizon, where home, real home, waited. Behind him, his mother looked toward the diner's glowing window, and for the first time in decades, she didn't feel trapped. She felt free. The road stretched ahead like a long, quiet ribbon of dusk, its edges softening as the last of the light surrendered to evening. Darren walked with measured breaths, each step steadier than the last, carrying the echoes of everything he had reclaimed. Behind him, the town lay muted beneath the hum of nightfall, and somewhere within its narrow streets, his mother was packing the fragments of a life she had finally chosen to leave. The thought warmed him, though a thin thread of worry tugged at the back of his mind. Change always left a shadow, even when it promised freedom. He reached the small bus station at the edge of town, a place that smelled of worn vinyl seats, diesel fumes, and stories nobody ever spoke aloud. A single street lamp flickered above the bench, throwing a pale halo across the pavement. Darren settled onto the bench, drawing in a long, steadying breath. For the first time since stepping back into the place that once tried to erase him, he felt his chest loosen, as though the weight of 10 years had finally begun dissolving. But quiet moments rarely stay quiet. A familiar voice broke the stillness behind him, raspy, rigid, unmistakable. "So this is how you return." Darren's shoulders stiffened. He turned slowly. His father stood near the entrance, hands buried deep in the pockets of his oil-stained jacket, jaw clenched around words he hadn't yet chosen. The years had not softened him. They had carved him harder. Lines etched deep across his face, eyes colder than Darren remembered. Yet something else flickered beneath the sternness, a tension, a hesitation, a crack. Darren rose, keeping his breath calm. I wasn't hiding. His father stepped closer. You could have fooled me. You didn't even come to the house. It wasn't the house for me, Darren replied quietly. Not for a long time. A muscle twitched in the older man's jaw. The silence that followed felt like a taut wire between them, ready to snap. You talked to your mother, his father said finally. Not a question. A statement soaked in discomfort. She came to me, Darren corrected, and now she's leaving. Darren inhaled, slow and deep. She deserves to. A heavy stillness settled. Cars passed distantly on the highway, their headlights smearing faint streaks through the rising dark. A bus pulled in, hissed, paused, and departed again, leaving only the two of them in its wake. Father and son, years and ruin stretched between them. His father shifted, boots scraping the concrete. You could have stayed. His tone faltered on the last word, like gravel breaking apart. Darren held his gaze. You threw me out. I was angry. You were cruel. A breath left the older man. It sounded closer to a sigh than he meant it to. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't ready. Darren's voice softened. Ready for what? For a son like you. The words hung in the air, ugly, unpolished, but honest in a way that made Darren's stomach tighten. He measured his father's face, searching for something. Regret, maybe, fear, or a crack of humanity beneath all the rigid years. Did you think I needed you to be ready? Darren asked. His father didn't answer. The silence spoke enough. Darren stepped back, needing space. But his father followed. You made her leave, the man muttered. No, Darren said. You did. Another silence, heavier than the last. The wind picked up, carrying the faint rattle of leaves across the pavement. A moth fluttered near the street lamp, beating its wings wildly against the light. Darren watched it struggle, watched it cling, and felt a strange ache rise in him. I didn't come back for revenge, he murmured, and I'm not here to punish you. His father stared at him, confusion shadowing his features. Then why did you come? Darren's voice was steady, without anger. To make sure no one else carries the weight you put on me. Not Mom. Not anyone. His father swallowed hard, as if the word scratched on the way down. You think you're better than me now. No, Darren replied, but I know I'm different from the man you wanted me to be, and I'm proud of that. A faint tremble crossed his father's expression. It was tiny, barely there, but it cracked something open. He looked older suddenly, smaller. I thought I was protecting this family, the man whispered. I thought I was keeping it strong. You broke it, Darren said softly, and you broke yourself too. The lamp flickered again, casting shadows across their faces. His father's voice dropped. Is there any part of you that can forgive me? Darren felt the question settle into him like a stone, heavy and honest. He searched himself, not for anger, but for clarity. He had carried the past like a wound for so long that he had forgotten what healing felt like. Now, standing in this dim pool of light, he felt the scar rather than the ache. I don't hate you, he said, but forgiveness doesn't undo anything. It just means I'm not letting the past own me anymore. His father closed his eyes, and for the first time Darren saw something unmistakable, remorse, raw and trembling. The night deepened around them. In the distance, another bus approached, its lights bright and steady. Darren glanced toward it, then back at the man who had once shut him out of the only home he'd known. You don't have to stay broken, he said quietly. You can be better than the man who threw his child into the dark. His father stared at him, eyes shining in a way Darren had never seen. The bus pulled in with a hiss, doors opening. Darren stepped back toward it. His father's voice cracked. Will I ever see you again? Darren paused at the first step. That depends, he said gently, on the man you choose to be tomorrow. The door shut behind him. The bus pulled away, leaving his father standing alone beneath the flickering lamp, watching the son he once lost disappear into the night. This time not as a child broken by rejection, but as a man who had reclaimed his voice, his truth, and his life. And somewhere between the fading lights and the steady hum of the engine, Darren felt something lift inside him, light as breath, warm as dawn. The storm that once defined him had finally passed. And yet, as the road opened before him, he knew his story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.